There is a strange beauty to be found in the silk-smooth darkness of a story well told. Step into our world of shadows and light, where every secret is a thread in a much larger tapestry. Subscribe now and help us unravel the mystery together.
The day my son-in-law slid the manila envelope across my kitchen table, I poured him a cup of coffee first. I want you to understand that. I poured it, set it down on the saucer with the little chip on the rim, and I said, "Cream?" Like he was company, like the man hadn't driven 4 hours to take the only thing in my life worth keeping. I'm 71 years old. I have lived in this same house in Macon, Georgia for 43 years, and in all that time I have learned exactly one thing worth passing on. People will tell you who they are if you just give them enough quiet to do it in. So I poured the coffee, and I sat down across from him, and I waited. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up because none of it makes sense unless you know how I ended up raising a child at an age when most women are picking up porch furniture. My daughter was 19 when she had him. I won't pretend I wasn't scared for her. She was bright in that brittle way some girls are. All sharp edges and big plans, and she'd gotten tangled up with a man named Royce who wore nice shoes and lied as easy as breathing. When the baby came, she named him Eli, and I remember holding him in that hospital and thinking he was the most serious-looking infant I had ever seen. Didn't cry much, just looked at the ceiling lights like he was trying to count them. For the first couple years, things were almost normal. My daughter would drop him with me on weekends, and I'd have him on the porch swing, and he'd stack things. Anything he could get his hands on. Bottle caps, dominoes, the little wooden spools my mother left me. He'd line them up by color, then by size, then by something only he understood, and if you moved one, Lord, he would let you know about it. When he was 3, the daycare called my daughter in for a conversation. That's how they put it. By 4, there were words like spectrum and evaluation floating around, and I watched my daughter's face go from worried to something harder. She started staying out later, started leaving him with me on a Friday and not coming back until Tuesday. Then the Tuesdays became the next weekend. I didn't say much. What was there to say? A grandmother who tells her daughter she's failing only loses her daughter faster. So I just kept the boy, kept feeding him, kept the porch light on, kept telling myself she'd come around. She came around, all right. She came around to my front door one rainy October morning when Eli was 5, with 2 trash bags of his clothes and his little blue inhaler in a sandwich baggie. And she said the words I will hear in my sleep until the day they put me in the ground. She said, "Mama, I can't do this. He's too much. I'm not built for this." I said, "He's your son." And she looked at me with those brittle eyes and she said, "He's better off with you. You're patient. I'm not." Then she got back in Royce's car and they drove off, and the rain kept coming down, and I stood there holding 2 garbage bags of a 5-year-old's whole life. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. Because people always expect the crying. I didn't have time to cry. There was a child in my doorway who needed his breakfast. So I made him breakfast. That was the beginning of 11 years. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was easy because it wasn't. And I think you deserve the truth more than you deserve a pretty story. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor with the fan on so he wouldn't hear me. And I did the math on my pension over and over, like the numbers were going to change. There were mornings he wouldn't put his shoes on, just would not, and we'd be late for everything, and I'd want to scream into a pillow. There was a meltdown in the middle of a Kroger one Saturday so bad that a woman near the register said, loud enough for me to hear, "Some people just can't control their kids." I turned around and looked at her and I said, "He's not out of control, ma'am. He's overwhelmed. There's a difference, and you'd know it if you ever loved anybody harder than yourself." She didn't have anything to say to that. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a child like Eli. The world acts like the diagnosis is the whole story, like the label is the boy. But the boy was so much more than the label. He couldn't always look me in the eye, but he could look at a thing, a real complicated thing, and understand it down to its bones in a way that made my breath catch. When he was 7, I gave him an old broken alarm clock from the junk drawer, the kind with the gears, just to keep his hands busy. He had it apart in 20 minutes and back together in 40, and it kept better time after than it ever had before. When he was 9, our neighbor down the street, a kind man, a retired postman, he'd watch Eli sometimes, Taught him a little about the computer, and within a year Eli was teaching him. By 11, Eli was up at all hours with a second-hand laptop I'd bought him with my tax refund, building things. Little programs. He talked to me about them in this flat, fast voice when he got excited, and half of it went over my head, but I'd nod and say, mm-hmm. And is that right? Because what he needed wasn't for me to understand the code. What he needed was for somebody to be glad he was alive. I want to tell you about the schools, but I'll keep it short because the schools nearly broke me. They didn't want to give him what he needed. An aide, a quiet room, time on his tests. I sat in meetings with people half my age who'd never met my grandson telling me what he could and couldn't do, and I learned to bring a folder. Doctor's letters, evaluations, the law printed out and highlighted. I made myself a nuisance, a polite one, but a nuisance. I missed church to sit in those rooms. I borrowed against this house once to pay for a specialist they wouldn't cover. And the whole time, the whole 11 years, not one phone call from my daughter. Not on his birthday. Not at Christmas. Once, when he was 8, a card came with $20 in it and no return address. And I knew it was from her, and I didn't tell him, because I couldn't stand to watch him hope. So that's the soil this story grew in. You understand now. A boy nobody wanted but me, and an old woman who decided he was worth everything she had. Now let me tell you what he built. When Eli was 15, he started working on something he wouldn't fully explain to me. He'd been bothered for a long time by a problem most people don't even notice. He had a friend from his social skills group, a sweet, anxious girl who was nonverbal, used a tablet to talk, tapping out words one by one, slow and frustrating. Eli decided that wasn't good enough. He spent the better part of a year teaching a program to learn the way a particular person communicates, the shortcuts, the patterns, the rhythm of how one specific mind reaches for words, so the tablet could start finishing thoughts the way a close friend would. So it stopped being a keyboard and started being a voice. He showed it to me one night at the kitchen table. He had his friend on a video call, and she used his program, and she said fast, almost like talking, "Ellie is my best friend. He sees me." And then this child of mine, who didn't hug, who flinched from touch, he reached over and he held my hand for the first time in months, and he said, "Grandma, I think this could help a lot of people." I said, "I think you're right, baby." I didn't understand what happened next. I still don't fully. A teacher entered it in a competition. The competition led to a man from a company in Atlanta driving down to our house in a car worth more than my home. And by the time Eli was 16, that little program he built to give his friend a voice had become something the world wanted. And the world put a number on it. And the number was $3,200,000. $3.2 million. In my kitchen, where I'd been doing the math on my pension 1,000 nights. I'm not going to lie and tell you the money didn't scare me. It did. Because I have lived long enough to know what money does. Money is a flashlight. It doesn't change people. It just shows you who they were standing in the dark. It took my daughter exactly 9 weeks to find out. I will never know how she heard. There'd been a little article, a local thing, Making Teens App Changes Lives. Maybe a cousin sent it to her. Maybe she had a Google alert on her own son's name, which would be the cruelest thing of all, that she'd set an alarm for him without ever once calling. But one Thursday afternoon the phone rang and I picked it up, and after 16 years I heard my daughter's voice say, "Hi, Mama. It's me. I think it's time I came home." Home. Like she'd been at the store. I'll be honest with you. There was 1/2 second, one little flicker, where the mother in me leaned toward that voice like a plant toward a window. That never goes away no matter what they do to you. But it passed because right behind it came the memory of 2 garbage bags in the rain. She came that Sunday, and she didn't come alone. She brought her son-in-law. Well, my son-in-law now, I suppose. She'd married Royce after all, and a third man I'd never seen, in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder. She introduced him on my own front porch as our family attorney. That's when I knew it wasn't a homecoming. It was a collection. We sat in the living room. My daughter looked good. I'll give her that, expensive in a way that didn't used to be her. She kept smiling at Eli, who sat in the corner chair with his hands flat on his knees, not looking at her, rocking just slightly the way he does when the air in a room is wrong. She kept saying his name like it was a word she'd practiced. Ellie. Eli, sweetheart, look how big you are. I've missed you so much, Eli. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the lawyer's folder. The lawyer did most of the talking after that. He was smooth about it. He talked about how my daughter had never relinquished her parental rights, how there had been no formal adoption, how his Eli was still a minor, his mother was his natural legal guardian, and how the proceeds of his work would be, in the eyes of the law, under her stewardship. He used that word, stewardship, like she was going to take care of it for him. I felt the floor tilt, because here is the ugly thing. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had been so busy raising that child, loving that child, fighting schools for that child, that I had never once gone down to a courthouse and made it official. I had power of attorney for medical things. I had nothing that said the money was safe. I'd been operating on the assumption that love was a legal document. It is not. I called the only lawyer I knew, a woman from my church's daughter who did wills and such, and she came over the next evening and looked at my papers, and I watched her face fall, slow like a slow leak. She said, "I'll be straight with you because you deserve it. Without a guardianship order, without adoption, she has a real claim. A judge could very well side with her. We can fight it, but we might lose. We might lose." I lay awake that whole night with those 3 words. And here is the part I think about most, even now. The next morning I was at that kitchen table again, gray and shaking, with the lawyer's manila envelope of demands sitting in front of me. They'd left it for me to review with counsel, and I was as low as I had been since the day in the rain. And Eli came in. He poured himself a glass of milk, very precise, exactly to the line he always pours it to, and he sat down across from me, and he looked at the envelope, and then he did something he almost never does. He looked right at me, right in the eyes, and he held it. And he said very quietly, "Grandma, when she comes back, let her talk. Just let her talk. Don't interrupt her. I need her to talk." I didn't understand. I said, "Baby, what are you?" He said, "Trust me, like I trust you." And then he went back to his room, and through the door I heard him typing. So when they came back that Friday, my daughter Royce, and the gray suit lawyer to finalize things, I did what my grandson asked. I poured the coffee, I said cream, and then I sat down and I let her talk. And Lord, did she talk? She'd clearly rehearsed it. She talked about how hard her life had been, how Royce's business had failed, how she'd always intended to come back, but the time was never right. She talked about how she was Eli's mother, and a mother's bond can't be broken by paperwork. She talked about how I was getting old. She said that in my own house, and how it wasn't appropriate for me to be managing a 16-year-old's finances at my age. She talked about how the money would be protected with her, invested, how she'd set aside an allowance for Eli's needs. She talked for nearly 20 minutes, and the more she talked, the more relaxed and certain she got, the way a liar does when they think they're winning. And the whole time, my grandson sat in the corner chair with his secondhand laptop open, and he didn't say one word. When she finally finished, she folded her hands and she smiled and she said, "So I really do think this is best for everyone." And Eli closed his laptop, and he stood up, and he walked over and he set it on the coffee table, open, facing them, and on the screen was a recording. Audio with the words scrolling underneath as they were spoken, clean and time-stamped, the way his program does. It was her voice. From the phone call, the first call, the Thursday one, before she'd ever set foot in the house. I hadn't known he was on the line. He picked up the extension in his room out of habit, the way he does. And his program, the one that listens and transcribes and learns a voice, had simply done what he built it to do. It had kept a record. And on the recording, before she knew anyone was listening, before the lawyer, before the rehearsed speech about a mother's love, my daughter's voice said clearly to Royce in the background, "I don't even want the kid, just the money. We'll figure out somewhere to put him. The old lady can keep visiting him or whatever." The room went so quiet I could hear the porch swing creaking in the wind outside. The lawyer's face did something complicated. He was the first to understand, because understanding ugly things was his job. He cleared his throat and he said, carefully, that recorded conversations could be an issue in court. That intent, like that on the record, could be very damaging to any claim of acting in the child's interest, and that he would need to speak with his client privately. My daughter wasn't looking at the lawyer. She was looking at her son. And for the first time since she'd walked back into my life, the expensive smile was gone, and underneath it was just a scared girl who'd been caught. The same girl who used to lie to me about where she'd been on a Saturday night. She said, "Ellie, baby, you don't understand. I was upset, I didn't mean." And Eli looked at her, steady, calm, the calmest I've ever seen him. And he said, "I understand fine. I understand patterns. You only call when something changes. You called when there was money. You didn't call when I was in the hospital with my asthma. You didn't call when I made the honor roll. You didn't call when I made the honor roll. You didn't call for 11 years. I tracked it. The data is very clear." He paused. "Grandma stayed. The data is clear about that too." Then he turned to me and he said, "Grandma, I'd like them to leave now, please." I have replayed that moment in my mind more times than I can count, and I still don't have a word big enough for what I felt. It wasn't triumph. It was too sad to be triumph. It was something more like the feeling of finally setting down something heavy you've carried so long you forgot it was heavy. They left. The lawyer first, fast. Then Royce. My daughter stood in the doorway a moment, the same doorway where she'd left him in the rain. And she looked at me, and I think she wanted me to say something that would let her off the hook. I have spent my whole life letting her off hooks. I didn't this time. I just said, "He made you a voice that could help people who can't speak for themselves, and the first thing it ever recorded was you saying you didn't want him. You sit with that. I'm done sitting with it for you." And I closed the door, gently. I want you to know it was gently. I'm not a slammer. She never went to court. The lawyer surely told her what that recording would do to her in front of a judge, what it would do to her in front of anybody. We did the paperwork I should have done years before. Eli, now that he understood it all, asked the court himself to make me his legal guardian, and at 16, with what he built and how clearly he could explain himself. The judge listened. It was done in an afternoon. 40 minutes? 11 years late and 40 minutes long. Eli's 19 now. He still lives close. He's working on something new, something about helping kids in foster care keep track of their own records so they don't get lost in the system. And when he talks about it, his voice goes flat and fast and his hands move. And I sit at that same kitchen table and I say, "Mm-hmm. And is that right?" Because he still doesn't need me to understand the code. He needs me to be glad he's alive. And I am. God, I am. People ask me sometimes, the ones who've heard pieces of this, whether I hate her. My own daughter. And the honest answer is no. I don't have the energy for hate. And besides, hate is just love that got lost on the way home. What I feel is sorrier than hate. I feel sorry that she stood in the dark her whole life and never once turned toward the window. I feel sorry that she had a boy who could teach a machine to find the words a person can't say, and she never learned to say the only words that mattered. But mostly I don't feel much about her at all anymore. I'm too busy. There's a young man who calls me every Sunday, and he tells me what he's building, and I tell him I'm proud, and at the end he always says the same thing, in that flat, careful voice that I have come to love more than my own life. He says, "Thank you for staying, Grandma." And every single time I say, "Where else would I have gone, baby? You were mine." I used to think love was enough, that if you just loved a child hard enough and long enough, the world would somehow notice and do right by you both. I learned the hard way that love without action is just a feeling you carry around. The reason I almost lost Eli wasn't because I didn't love him. It was because I trusted that my love was self-evident, and I never walked down to that courthouse to make it real on paper. 11 years of devotion, and a single afternoon of carelessness nearly undid all of it. That's the chain of cause and effect I want you to see plainly. Every choice plants something, and you don't always get to pick when the harvest comes. My daughter planned it too, all those years. Every birthday she skipped, every hospital night she missed, every honor roll she never heard about. She thought she was just walking away clean. But Eli was keeping count, not out of spite. He simply sees patterns the way you and I see colors. And the pattern of her absence was as clear to him as a line drawn on a wall. When she came back smiling, The data didn't lie for her. People always forget that their absences are part of the record too. If I could put one thing into the hands of a young person watching this, it would be the understanding that doing right by people quietly, when nobody is clapping, is the only thing that holds up when the lawyers and the money show up. That's the first thing. The second is to use the mind you were given. Eli wasn't saved by being sweet or being pitied. He was saved because he thought carefully, built something patiently, and kept a clear-eyed record of what was true. A sharp mind that's pointed at the truth is worth more than any amount of charm. And the third thing, the one that cost me the most, is plain stubbornness, the refusal to quit on the hard mornings. Those years of fighting schools and borrowing against this old house and sitting on the bathroom floor doing math, that wasn't glamorous. Nobody made a video about that part. But that's where the win actually came from. So I tell you this, be the kind of person who shows up when it's inconvenient, because that's what people will remember when it counts. Think clearly and build something real, because cleverness without honesty just makes a smoother liar. And don't you dare quit on the people who are yours, just because the road is long and quiet and nobody's watching. Eli calls me every Sunday now. He still says, "Thank you for staying." And every time I understand a little better that staying was the whole thing. Not the money, not the app. Just the staying done over and over on the days it would have been easier to leave. That's what I have to give him, and it turned out to be the only thing that couldn't be taken in a courtroom.